switch housing is to fit the power cord assembly. For the sake of this film, I'm using the existing power cord that I previously removed. If, however, you've replaced the power cord, it will be necessary to fit the cable protector over the end of the power cord before proceeding. Concentrating on this area of the switch housing, you need to locate the end, the outer insulation of the power cord into the end of the retaining channel, and then locate it all the way around, ensuring it is adequately seated. Within all retaining locations. Then concentrating on the live wire need to feed it up into the hole in the side of the switch housing, and ensure that it's taut within the channel, and then pull it up through the top, and then back down into the hole in the center of the switch housing, so that it protrudes housing. With the power cord fitted, you can then concentrate on the internal power cord. You need to start by locating all of the three wires from the internal power cord into this retaining detail on the lower rear corner of the switch housing. Once all three are retained, you can then take your neutral wire and then bring it around to the rear, connect it to the neutral wire from the main power cord, and locate it into the retaining channel. Then the neutral wire from the power cord sits in this channel in the center. And sits directly on top of the main power cord. Once you've located the two neutral wires, the two red ones. Starting with the red wire that is piggybacked or attached to the live wire, you just need to feed it in to the side of the housing, and then it just sits in the side there, ready to be attached to the brush bar switch in a moment. The distance from the terminal to where the wire enters the housing should be approximately half an inch. You can then take the single red wire or the switch wire and bring it into the housing, and then just sits between these two retainers, bends around and just sits above the wire, ready to be attached to the other terminal of the brush bar switch. With the wires in position, you can fit the brush bar switch firmly into the side of the housing and attach two wires. And then the live wire with the red wire attached to it back around to the front of the switch housing. You can then fit the main on-off switch. The switch sits in the housing, so looking from the front of the housing, the switch button sits to the right-hand lower corner. You should attach the live wire from the power cord assembly to the terminal on the top of the switch, and then the two wires from the internal power cord onto the side terminal. You'll then find that as you locate the switch, into the housing, that the two internal wires should naturally just bend and sit in a channel to the side of the switch, and just push it firmly, making sure it was adequately seated over the pip detail. After fitting the switches, you can concentrate on locating the push rods. You want to start by fitting the brush bar switch push rods. So just to remind you, that's the two-part push rod assembly rather than the three-part assembly. Once again, this is push rod 1, and this is push rod 2. When fitting the push rods, you want to ensure that the switch housing is upside down. Otherwise, you'll find if you keep turning it around the right way, the push rods push rod 1 and drop it into the channel next to the brush bar switch. So it's this channel here that I've just dropped the first push rod into. But at this stage, it's imperative that you make sure the push rod protrudes through the end. So as you can see there, that's not protruding fully. So what you then need to do is insert a screwdriver and just twist it until it does protrude through. Like that. You can then drop the second push rod into the channel so that the wing on the push rod is on the side next to the brush bar switch. And then gently press the button on the switch to then allow the push rod to ride past the switch. You will then find that if you do turn the switch housing over, that the push rods won't drop out the bottom. We can then concentrate on fitting the 3 push rods on the on and off switch side of the housing. You need to start, however, by fitting the second push rod, which is this shape one, first. So as with the last one, just drop it into the switch, you may then find that once again you need to place a screwdriver into the end of it and just manipulate it so that the first push rod orientates and then protrudes through the switch housing. You can then fit push rod number 3 it lowers in so the chamfer detail sits next to the switch button. So drop it down and ride it over the switch button. Once again, then you'll find that when you turn the housing over, the push rods don't fall out. And you then have to take push rod number 1 and place it on the inside onto the top of push rod number 2. After fitting the push rods, you can then refit the brush bar actuator before fitting it into the housing. Ensure the reset switch is just sat on the pip detail. You then need to lower brush bar switch actuator into the housing, but at this point do not press it firmly into place. If you press it down, all that's going to happen is all those push rods you fitted in a brush bar side are all going to drop out again. So what you need to do is just hold, push rod number 2, just place a finger underneath it, and then firmly click the brush bar actuator into position. You can then fit the on-off actuator. Ensure that the spring is securely located onto the retaining feature on the underside. Just check it's secure by turning it upside down. And then lower. The actuator into the housing, and you ensure that the spring sits onto the hip detail on the previously fitted reset arm. Once you're happy it's located over it, you can then press the on-off actuator into position, but once again, before you do that, make sure you place a finger under the third push rod, or it will all drop out. The final part to fit is to switch cover. You must make sure that the two springs are sat on the retainers on the inside of the cover, and it's imperative that those springs are straight. You then want to take your switch housing release the main power cord slightly from this channel, just so the cables sat in the middle of the housing. Now what you don't want to do at any stage whilst fitting the cover is press either of the actuators or your push rods will eject themselves. Now, this or the fit in this cover is probably without doubt the hardest part of this switch housing. The problem is it's very easy to misalign the springs in the cover, and if they misalign, they get bent. You need to replace them. So when you slide the cover over the housing, the two springs must insert themselves in the same channels where you previously inserted the push rods. So there's a case of just lowering the housing over the cover, and I appreciate it's hard to see in this. It's a case of just making sure they definitely slot straight over the springs. And then just slide the housing down, and if the springs are fitted correctly, you shouldn't feel any resistance when sliding it down. If you do, you into one of the springs, you have to start again. So slide it down so the screw holes are aligned, and then if you just slide the cable protector into the right position on the power cable, and then position it into the side of the housing, like so. It will lock it all into place, then nothing can fall out. Once all parts are located, you can ensure the internal power cord is securely fastened behind any retaining details, and then lift the switch cover up, locate it into the two small pip details on the lower edge. Partially locate the switch housing into the top of the chassis, but before you fully locate it, just drop the wand release button into the top of it. You can fit the spring afterwards once the screws are fitted. Then fit the 4 screws in the rear of the upper chassis. You can then lift up the wand release button and fit the spring two retaining features. You can then finish by fitting the one handle assembly and one assembly.